All right, we're going to talk about roses today, and to start our first rose example, I'm going to use a Stargazer cake. It's a tag Stargazer, and I do recommend when you're starting out with roses that you pick a split cake that has 3 colors, a dark, a medium, and a white. It can be blue, it can be green, I don't care what it is. But just make sure it has a dark, a medium, and a light tone, and that the light is white. I really think it's the best way to practice. Once you have that down, you can do rose with almost any one stroke, but in the beginning, this is going to be easier for you. Also have some white handy, and I'll show you why. I'm going to start by using a face painting shop brush. It is the short angled 3/4 pink tip brush. This is one of my all-time favorite brushes, and I think it's a really good one for roses. I also like this brush for roses because it has a distinctive toe, so it has a distinctive angle, so I always know where the toe of the brush is and where the heel is. I don't have to think too much about it, but I do use flat brushes as well, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, and we're actually going to go through a lot of different brushes you can use to do roses, but this is what we're going to start with. So if you're having trouble with roses, stick around and we're going to get into a lot of things that will hopefully help you. Okay, so your general shape for a rose petal is a U with some movement. So you want to move your brush into this U shape, but you want to wiggle back and forth while you do it to create movement. I very often kind of drag the toe in to create that illusion that it's a folded petal when I'm doing that. So you can also, as you get more comfortable, you can make the shape a little bit more interesting. So do the general U shape, but maybe you peek out the center a little bit, and then you drag in like this. So in general, you want the U shape, but for the outer petals, you want a little bit of movement. For that inner petal, or that what's going to be the rose bud, you can just have that kind of U. Okay, so another thing to think about, we're gonna do a full rose here as an example. You want to imagine a circle. So we're going to imagine kind of a small to medium-sized circle, because if you imagine a huge circle, you're going to have a giant rose. Typically, you're going to be doing this on someone's face. So you don't want to try to make too large of a flower, or it's going to like engulf their face and look really weird. So think small circle. Unless you're doing it on someone's arm, you can get away with a little bit of a bigger cabbagey rose, but I try to tend to keep them kind of like tight and small. Another thing we're gonna do is we're going to activate our white and create a little like globby pool of white that is activated and ready to pull from. So when I go to do a rose on someone's face, I will grab the one stroke that I'm going to use, and then I will immediately activate some white and then set it off to the side so that it's ready when I need it, and I will show you why in a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure our brush is nice and loaded here, and we'll get started with our rose. So I am going to start my petals just around where I have that circle. And if you need to draw the circle at first, go ahead, draw the circle. But eventually you're not going to need to do that. So another trick to make your roses look more realistic in the end is to not make each petal perfect, because if you go and look at roses or study roses, they're not perfect. There might be, you know, a petal that sticks out a little bit more and that's a little shorter, like this one. so it's not as wide and not as tall as this one next to it. You can also play with perspective too, and you can make, you know, the petals at the top of the face that would be behind a little bit smaller than the ones in front. So as you get more comfortable, you can do that kind of stuff. But maybe I'll make this one stick out a little bit more, and then I'm gonna pull the toe of the brush in a little bit. And my paint's a little dry because I'm on a board here, but all right, so let's see, we've got 3, 4. I really don't want to do 6, so I'm gonna do this one a little bit bigger. Push it out and then pull it back in. Odd numbers are always a good idea. You can absolutely do one with even numbers, that's or even number of petals, that's fine, but if you can avoid it, it always looks better, I think. Okay, so my brush is loaded and ready to go, but I want to show you guys something else while we have the center of this rose open. I'm gonna grab my double fusion palette here, and I'm gonna grab, if I can get it out, all right, so not only is this really wet because I'm on a board, but this layer needs to dry. So I want to show you a couple things while this dries. I'm going to go ahead and grab Tink, which is one of the Leanne's greens from the Fusion palette, and I am going to load up a brush, and while that first layer of paint dries, we're going to talk about your leaves coming out from your roses. Sorry if my voice is kind of froggy. I have been really sick and kind of feel like I'm losing my voice now. So I'm really sorry, you guys, if I sound terrible. All right, so I'm gonna get this loaded up. Now this is also a really good tip if you did have a pretty wet first layer of your rose. Go ahead and grab your green and do your leaves while you're waiting for that first layer to dry, and that way you're gonna have less bleeding and blending in of the colors, because that's a huge problem with people. So if that's one of your problems, then do the leaves and do some of the accents before you go to do the second and third layer of the rose. Okay, so one of the things that I see people do often with roses is they start the leaf way out here in the corner, and they will do something like this. That's fine, right? It's a pretty leaf. What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with it is that the leaf started here on the outside of the petal. But if you really think about where the stem of this rose is, the stem is down here in the center. So the leaf should start here in the center. Well, if that leaf started there, then all we would see of that leaf is the very, very tip. And instead, we had the leaf start out here where the petal ends. So it tends to not look very realistic. It's not a problem in the sense where anyone who you're painting on is going to go, oh, that's, you know, the perspective of that leaf is all wrong, and, you know, I wanted a realistic rose. No one is ever going to say that to you. So if you do that and it works for you and you like it, by all means, don't listen to me. But if you are trying to get a more realistic rose look, then what you want to do is, hopefully that's not too wet. So what you want to do instead is you really want to visualize that leaf coming from here. So then what would you see? You would probably just see the tip of the leaf like that, right? So how do we achieve that? The way I do it, and that I think works well, is that I hold my one stroke almost horizontal to where I want that leaf to come out from. So I hold the toe or top color of my brush down, and then I press, and then I wiggle out, and then I can wiggle back in. And you can do this a lot of different ways, however you're comfortable. If you want more of a spiky leaf, you can go like this and spike it out, and then drag the toe in to create some veins. And that looks more realistic than having a leaf just poke out. From there, you can always pull these little whimsical things, which I love doing. And then let's say on this side, we just have the very, very end of that leaf coming from the bottom of the rose. So there you go. That's one way to very easily add to the illusion of a more realistic rose. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so now our first layer is completely dry. So I'm gonna go back and load my one stroke again. Now this is where the importance of this little pool of white comes in. So what I'm gonna do is just flick my brush right over that little gathered pool of white. I'm not gonna roll it around in there. All I did was sweep and pick it up. So now I have a choice. I can go straight into doing the center part of my rose. If I have time, I love adding a second layer because I think it adds a ton of character. So what I'll do is I'll go in between two petals and I will make it smaller. So I'm going to start moving inward. So I'm doing another layer around this center circle, but I'm going to not go as wide. So as wide as I made this petal, I'm going about half that with my second petal and much more concentrated and small, okay? So get loaded again, and I'm talking and on a board, so everything's drying up. All right, so here comes my second petal, second layer. I gotta get my white activated again because I was being so chatty that it's like gone. On the job, when you're going faster, stuff doesn't dry up as much, and on skin it doesn't dry up as much. Boards tend to like eat all the moisture out of your paint. So here we go. Let's do this again. That's better. All right. So picking up that white when you do it correctly will add a ton of contrast. I hope you guys can see that. This can make a huge difference for those of you that feel like you're loading your white and the white disappears, because it just happens. Because as you're dragging those colors over the other colors, they all start to blend together. So if you really want your petals to pop, dragging the toe through white makes a crazy huge difference. I notice so much when I do this regularly how much better my roses look. All right, so we'll do one more little guy right there, and then I love dragging that toe in because it really gives the illusion of a curved petal. Okay, so we want this layer to dry too. Now, again, on skin, it's going to dry so much faster than it is on the board, but we need to give it time or else it's going to be a horrible example. So let's talk a little bit about doing more of a rosebud. So doing rosebuds can be a nice way to add some interest and dimension to a rose design. So if I was doing this on a cheek and I wanted to have, you know, it be more like stacked roses, I would come over to the side and I would do maybe just a little wiggle with the U, and then make sure to reload. I would definitely make sure that tip of that brush has a decent amount of white, especially if I'm not going to wait for it to dry. And then I'm just going to go not even half. See how I curved before I got halfway? It's like a quarter curve in to start that illusion. And then I'm going to, again, constantly reload because you are blending these colors like into each other every single time you place that one stroke down. So you need to constantly reload and push those colors back into where they're supposed to be. So I'm going to make sure I have a really nice glob of white here, because now I'm going to go from the other side of my rose. And I think I might block you guys a little bit when I do this. I'm going to try not to. So now I'm going to go from the other side and I'm going to close it up again so that I have a very curved in rose. And then I'm going to go right at the top and I'm just going to pull the toe in to curve that around. So this is a tricky step, and I'm going to show you guys again when I do the center of this. But this might have been one of the hardest things for me to get with roses. I, in the beginning, was doing a lot of stuff where I was like pushing the entire brush like down so that it was like, here, let me show you on this side. So I was pushing the brush like all the way down and trying to pull in and getting these like weird shapes that weren't quite right. And it took me a while to realize that you need to really hover on the very, very like tip of your brush and keep the brush almost completely vertical. Let me do it on this one. Can you see that? I'm trying to make sure I don't cover it up. So keep the brush almost completely vertical to, here, let me do this little curve first. So keep it almost completely vertical to the bud, right? And then push down, but then just pull the toe of the brush, nothing else. And then same on this side. So I have it vertical, I press, and then I drag the toe and nothing else. I think that's a really, really hard thing to get. And hopefully you can see it well enough and you know what I mean. So instead of pressing everything down and all those bristles and trying to pull this way, I just press vertically and then I drag the toe of the brush in to get that little sweep of a petal. Okay, so this is pretty dry, so I am going to load up again. And the center bud is the most important part to drag through white. I would say if you don't do the outside and you don't do the middle, do the center bud, because if that does not look like an extra layer everything's gonna blend in and it's just gonna be this monotone like glob on someone's face. Okay, so the bud, and you can see we're slowly like moving in on our circle there, right? So the bud also needs to go in between a petal. Doesn't matter where you put it, but make it in between. Don't put it right here, put it in between something. Another thing that I see people do is they will start the bud up here, and then it looks like the flower has been pulled up and out of itself. It looks very unnatural. You have got to put the bud in the center. It doesn't have to start here, but it has to end here. If it ends up here, the bottom of the bud, and then you're trying to fill in with extra strokes, you did it wrong. So, all right, hopefully my brush didn't dry out because I was chatting. Let's give it a try. So for the bud, you can make it a little wiggly, but you really don't have to. Yeah, my brush dried out. I'm not surprised. All right. So if you don't want to wiggle the inside center, which I often don't, then just do a little U shape. I'm really not liking how that white didn't pop, so let's do it one more time. There we go. Hopefully you can see that on camera pretty well. It's hard to tell for me what you guys can see well until I watch the footage afterwards. So I always kind of hope that I'm doing a good job for you guys. And then if I'm not, I super apologize. All right. So load it again, really drag that tip through, and I'm going to do it one more time just in case it's not showing up well on camera. All right, and then I'm going to pull it about 1/4 of the way around. Load again, drag that tip. I know it's tedious, but it really makes a huge difference. So now I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to close that bud up like that, and see how the bottom of my bud is now covering up the center of my rose. With this is past that second layer of petals, then it's gonna look like somebody pinched your rose and pulled it out, like somebody was being naughty or mean to your rose. So you don't want that. All right, so let's get that white on there. Okay, so now I'm going to hold my brush almost completely vertically, and the toe is going to be right here at the top of the curve of that bud. And I'm going to place it down, and then I'm going to sweep it around. Gosh, my paint is so dry. I don't know if it's just my house or what. And I know my throat, my voice sounds awful. I'm so sorry, you guys. Okay, so again on the other side, I'm going to hold it vertically. And this time I'm going to sweep that toe just underneath where I went. Now I do have a little bit of a dark spot right there. So what I can do is just create kind of a half faux petal by sweeping the toe and pressing out just a little bit to create another layer there. And now we have a completed rose. Another thing I like to do with roses is add glitter, add line work, all sorts of stuff. So for our bud, we're just gonna do a quick little, make it connect because we're gonna do some line work. If you guys follow my Instagram, you'll know that I paint a ton of flowers. I am maybe even obsessed with flowers. So I paint a lot of them, and I love to jazz them up with lines and dots, and I love adding like layers of color on them and all sorts of stuff. One thing I tend to do very often, and on kids' cheeks a lot as well, is add some line work, and you can do that in many different ways. I often use neon or white. You can do teardrops, which are hard to do on a board, I have to admit. You can do winged teardrops, which is what I call these guys, where it's like a teardrop with a wing. I do that, tend to do that a lot. It is a really good way to fill up space. And if you do it, white's always a good choice to do line work in because it pops and it's nice and clear and fun. But I really love doing it in unexpected colors like oranges and neon yellows and neon pinks and all that stuff. Really kind of lends itself to being like fun and surprising. So feel free to play around with it however you like, and add as much as you want. I love adding dots kind of to the end of a few like sprigs like this because it just extends that like whimsical look. And then once your rose is completely dry, if you do have some areas that faded in and aren't popping anymore, you can always go in with white and give it like a quick little highlight if you need to. Hopefully you don't have to, because it's, especially on the job, one of those things that you just really don't want to have to do, which is why dipping that edge in white can make a huge difference. But if you need to, just do it. If it turns into just like a globby mess, just go in and highlight the crud out of it and make it better. We've all done that, so don't be ashamed if it happens. You can always add a couple sparkly dots onto your rose as well, or add some starbursts for some added sparkle. All right, so that is our first rose. I hope that's helping so far, but I've got others to show you. A few other techniques, and I want to talk about different brushes that I use with roses too. So if you feel like you're still struggling, stick around, and I'm going to keep talking about roses and probably do some more line work, because once I get started, I just can't stop, and I'm absolutely obsessed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about all the different brushes you can use to do roses. I do roses with all sorts of brushes. I love this long bristled 3/4 inch flat from the face painting shop. I love doing roses with this. It has a ton of movement because the bristles are so long, but if you're a beginner, I wouldn't use that one. I would use the 3/4 inch flat, or you could go down to a 5/8 flat or even a 1/2 inch. I personally almost don't use a 1/2 inch for anything, but if your roses are getting too big, then use a 1/2 inch and see if that's better. I love, love, love this Grimace natural bristled brush. It's a 5/8, I believe. And it is an amazing brush for roses. I love, 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 love this brush. But again, for a beginner, I don't know that I would use that. Now, one thing, if you are having a lot of trouble with roses, that I would encourage you to try is a dagger brush. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right now, because when I am painting roses on the job, I tend to reach for this one a lot. This is the 3/8 dagger brush from the face painting shop. Now, one thing that you need to know is how to load a dagger brush. Because the longest part of the dagger brush is this angled edge, people tend to try to load it this way. So they hold it this way to load the side, but it doesn't really work very well that way. So you have to load a dagger brush the same way you would load a flat brush like this. You have to hold it vertically and then drag it over your color and pull it across what you want. So that's one thing that it takes a little getting used to if you're not used to using a dagger brush. But that really is the correct way to load them. And I'm going to show you why I like this so much. So one of the things that I like about this is that it has that natural curve to the bristles. So to get that rosebud shape is just so natural and so slick and easy, and you just push down and wiggle and then drag that toe in, and it's so nice. So I'm doing the same principle as I did before. I'm imagining a circle here in the center, getting my brush well loaded over and over again, dragging that toe through, and I'm going to create petals, and I'm going to pull. Now, one thing to notice too is that I just did this side of the brush. I put that petal down, and now I'm actually going to use the paint on the opposite side because I used up all the paint on this side on this petal. So now I'm going to use up the paint on the other side. Always flip your brushes around and use up both sides of that paint before you go to reload. Not only is it a huge time saver, but then you're not wasting paint. So let's see, I've got 3, 4, 5 petals. We're going to go ahead and do 6 and see what that looks like. Even though typically I don't do that, I've got a little bit of room here. So without trying to totally block you guys with a bad angle, I'm going to squeeze one more little petal in here. And it might overlap a little bit, but oh well, doesn't matter. Roses aren't actually perfect. And I do encourage you, if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at roses, you know, if you have a rose bush in your garden, go look at them. They're very irregular, unless they're maybe like competition roses or something, but like wild roses are kind of all over the place. Okay, so if I was really pressed for time, I would actually skip doing that second layer of petals and go right into doing the bud. So if I'm going to do that, I want to make sure I don't have too many gaps because I don't want it to look like a weak rose. Like, I'll show you. This one's not so bad because I know that by the time I do the middle, it's not going to be so bad, but I want to show you guys what I mean. What you want to avoid doing is a petal and then doing a big gap and another petal, and then another big gap, and a petal, and a gap, and a petal, and a gap, like this. I'm running out of paint, but you get the idea. You don't want that. You don't want it to be that spaced out, because then by the time I do the center, it's not going to be filled in. It's going to be really like pulled apart. I'm going to show you guys what I meant to by a mistake that people make by pushing the bud too far up. So I see a lot of people spreading them out too much and not putting those petals close together because they're afraid it's going to blend and it's not going to have the right illusion. But this illusion is better than this illusion. And then instead of putting the bud in the center, I see people putting that bud like way up here at the top of the rose. And then you have all of this you have to fill in. So then I tend to see people go like this. Okay, well now I have to fill in all this space. So I'm gonna, add those petals, and uh-oh, I still have all this other space to go, so I better add more petals, right? So I guess I need to add even more petals to fill in all the space. Okay, there we go, now I have my rose. Well, what you've done is you've stacked up all these petals to create this really pushed out bud. So that's what I meant by somebody grabbed your rose and pulled it out by the center, because you're pushing it out. You want that bud to be in the center of the flower. So even if I don't do that second row of petals, I'm gonna put the bud here. Almost the same place I would if I did have that second row of petals. So my bud is gonna go there. And notice how I try to keep this into a V. You don't want that bud to be too square, because then it's gonna be harder to get that illusion. You want this to have like a nice V shape so that you get that circular illusion more naturally. Okay, so now I'm going to pull in. I'm just going to do one. This is like my simple quick rose. So instead of doing the double layered inside, I'm just going to do one little swoop. Instead of going a quarter, I went like 3/4 of the way over. So I'm not going all the way to this edge. I'm just scooping over and just dry of that edge. And now, this is one of the reasons I love this brush too. If you have trouble using the 3/4 inch on the toe and keeping it hovering on the toe, try the Dagger Brush. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So this, the toe naturally, it favors the toe. And then you can pull up on the toe so nicely. All right, so we're gonna do another one right there. And I'm gonna fill in right there. So I think that one looks better than that one, but you guys let me know what you think. But I do encourage you to try the Dagger Brush. I think it's quite nice. My cat's over in the corner playing with toys, so if you hear like scratchy stuff, it's because she is going nuts. She's playing with a ball of string that I left out for her, and you'd think I left her out like catnip and like a live mouse or something. She is having way too much fun with it. All right, so I want to show you guys how nice this is just to do a bud too. So that Dagger Brush, because it's got that nice long toe, just makes the best little natural curve of a petal. I think it's brilliant. I think Dagger brushes are brilliant. I think people just don't use them enough, or they don't know how to use them. And I actually have a video that I filmed all about Dagger brushes that I've never actually edited and posted on YouTube. So if you guys actually want to see that, let me know. And I will actually edit it. I need to do a voiceover for it, which is one of the reasons I never posted it, because I'm lazy. But if you guys want to see that, let me know, because I show how to use every single size Dagger brush I have and how versatile they are, and they're quite amazing. Another reason I love Dagger brushes is because I love to pull like a whimsical line from my roses. Almost every time I do this on a girl's cheek, this ends up over the eye with like a nice little swoop on it. And then you can pull a couple from the other side as well. And then again, with your leaves, you want to imagine that they're coming from behind the rose. So you can make them quite large, really, so that if you were to actually draw where this ends, it's ending down in the center of that rose and not, you know, growing impossibly from the side of a petal, which is just not possible. So that is how I use a dagger brush for my roses. So here's another alternative to the traditional rose. Let me make sure I have some white on my brush here too. So what you can do is create like a little center bud, and then take your dagger brush and make these shapes around it. So you just want to kind of like engulf the bud with these wiggly little shapes. To create the look of a rose. So the key to making this look good is that you have to stagger the lines. So you can't do like this to make the rose look layered. You have to have like one line like this, and then another line like this, and then another line like that. You know what I mean? So hopefully that is coming off well and making sense. It also helps if you get kind of a nice sharp edge on some of these, but it doesn't have to be perfect, which is nice. But you really want to vary where the lines start and stop. So wherever you have a line like stop, you then want to go not right there to start another one. You want to come further out, and then you can kind of push in and pull up. So if you want to do this, you just have to make sure that it's a little balanced and that you've got kind of a round shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle by any means, but you want to kind of, in the end, even it out so that it has a nice like roundness to it. And it does kind of end up looking like a cabbage rose, right? I did do this rose in a floral video that I did where I did tons of different flower shapes, and a lot of people asked me about this rose. So if you are struggling with doing roses in the quote-unquote traditional way, this is a really easy way to do a rose. And I think the 3/8 Dagger Brush by the Face Painting Shop is probably the perfect brush to do it with. If you also are struggling with roses and you just need some alternative methods on how to paint them, just YouTube one-stroke roses. Don't YouTube search face painting videos. Just do one-stroke roses, and you can go down a massive list of videos on all sorts of different techniques to do one-stroke roses. I really hope this video helped you, but if you need more help, try that. For everyone who has been asking me for help with roses, I really hope that this resonates and that something in this video clicks with you. I've been getting a lot of messages about roses, and it's probably one of the #1 frustrations people have. So I really hope something in this video can help you get better with your roses. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!